Hello, and welcome to the No Bad Questions podcast, where I try to learn in a conversational manner, to break down jargon, and to present the least amount of filtering as possible on a wide array of topics. I hope that you learn something too. If you do and want to support the podcast, you probably already know all the ways that you can do so. You can like, share, subscribe, hit the notifications, but ultimately, and what I hope you choose to do, is watch to the very end. With that, we'll start today's podcast. Welcome to today's episode of the No Bad Questions podcast. My guest today is Robert Orenbaun. Robert is the founder and managing director for TechForge LLC, a veteran-owned technology startup. He's a diehard entrepreneur, cyber evangelist, and supporter of social activism in K-12 education and STEM. His nonprofit organization, the TechForge Foundation, is a community-driven charity that supports engagement in STEM education, creating learning opportunities in new and emerging technologies, encourages multidisciplinary collaboration, and funds research to enable knowledge exchange and technology accessibility. Robert's career has spanned the gamut from one-person startups and incubators to Fortune 100 companies. Robert works with all levels of stakeholders, from frontline engineers to Fortune 100 C-level executives and generals. His passions are education, technology, sharing ideas, mentoring young entrepreneurs, and meeting people with the same passion and energy to change the world. Robert, thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it. That bio makes me sound really awesome. I appreciate it.
Weird. I wonder who wrote it.
Yeah, that's great, man.
Well, that said, there's a lot in there, including a couple words around cybersecurity.
Yeah.
So what is cybersecurity?
Well, I can give you the definitive answer. There's quite a few definitions that float out on the internet. One of which, I'll paraphrase, it's basically just protecting networks, devices, and data, right? That's essentially what cybersecurity is. There's a whole lot to that. Like anything, as we've discussed before, everything's more complicated than you think it is.
Right.
But in general, cybersecurity, it's a growing field. There is many facets of cybersecurity. But basically just protecting all of your things so that somebody doesn't steal them.
Well, and so protecting all of your things, one of the things that is, I think, more and more common out there, and I know we've talked about this offline, but not necessarily as part of our lead up to our conversation today, is the things in the home, right? Smart dishwasher, smart TV, smart everything. So I'm assuming when you say protecting your things, people should be thinking about those things as part of that.
The Internet of Things, if you will.
Sure. And so maybe people probably hear that and may not know what that means. Can you, I mean, maybe it's simpler than most people think it is, but can you break that down, what that really means?
Sure. So, in historically, when the internet started, it was basically just a couple of computers and a couple of different universities, and they created a network using the phone company network, and they basically went point to point. Right.
Okay.
And then the internet grew to what we have today. Now everybody's got essentially an internet-enabled cell phone in their pocket, in their hand, usually in their face at all times. And then then all of a sudden your TVs, right? Your TVs, your cars start to have an address on the internet, right? An IP address. It's an internet protocol address. Everything on the internet has an address, right? So all these devices are now internet enabled. They're on the network, which means they're also accessible to other people, right? So that you can communicate. And that means good people and bad people. Right. Well, now the Internet of Things, when you hear that term, basically the goal in the future for most futurist technology companies is to have every single thing in the world be on the internet, have an internet address, be connected to the internet. And that includes your toaster, not just your cell phone, your television, but your toaster, your ironing board, your iron, your refrigerator, your microwave, everything in your house, every single light bulb. Whenever you put a smart bulb in your house, that light bulb itself is actually an internet device itself.
Really?
So every light bulb in your house is an internet device. If you have smart bulbs, and they're all controllable, which also means they're all hackable. right? So, yeah. So that Internet of Things, when you hear that term, it's basically just the connection of all the things to the internet.
Okay. All right. And so some things and some data are obviously going to be more important. Light bulbs are probably less important to protect for a company, for somebody at home, a homeowner, whatever, than a server that's got a bunch of, in my industry, healthcare information on it. In your industry or industries, maybe Defense Department data on it, things like this. So what should people, and by this, I mean, you could approach it from both the individual homeowner perspective or a company, what should they be protecting, more? Where should they spend their time, money, effort guarding their security?
So I would say for a company or an individual home user or private individual, the big three is probably the same for me. In general, I recommend obviously Social Security numbers and your biometric data, your health data, your protected health information. The term we're not using acronyms, but I'm sure it's an acronym you're familiar with, right?
Sure.
PHI, protected health information. But the big one is really your Social Security number. And that piece of data should be protected whether it's a private company or a private individual. It obviously links to your credit rating, your credit score, your ability to get credit, your employment, ironically, your Social Security benefits, which was what it was originally and only intended for.
The original thing it was created for. Yeah, just that.
The thing it was made for, right? Which now it's, as even I think recently, the Affordable Care Act, right? The Obamacare, as most people know it, now requires you to once again share your Social Security number with healthcare providers so that you can prove that you have healthcare insurance so you can get taxed for it, or not, get taxed for not having it, whichever the case may be. But now healthcare providers have to have your Social Security number again, which means that now your Social Security number is floating out there in every system that you touch, every vendor you talk to, right? Not necessarily a bad thing if people are protecting it, right? To your point, it needs to be protected. So that's the number one, Social Security number. And the next one, in my opinion, is probably biometrics. If we're talking about big three, right? Your biometric data.
And can you break down how you and how most people would define biometrics? I mean, I think I know what that means. I want to make sure I know, and obviously if the listeners want to know, because some of them might be using biometrics and not be thinking much about it.
Oh, I guarantee you most people aren't thinking about it, or at least not thinking about the implications long term for sharing that information, right? Biometrics, that can be your fingerprint, your whole palm print, your retinal, the layout of the veins in your eyes, which is your retinal scan, your retinal print, retinal pattern, whatever you want to call it.
Like Mission Impossible type stuff.
Exactly. And I can tell you there's a lot of companies, a lot of security companies that are using retinal scans. I mean, a lot of cell phones today use a thumbprint, right? Use a thumbprint to get into your phone. That's your biometric password, right?
Right.
Well, so that biometric password is your thumbprint. That thumbprint unlocks your phone, it decrypts your phone, or it opens a door in a secure facility, or it gets you into Disney World, right? Because you have to have a thumbprint to get into Disney World now. All right, actually, that's been, I guess, for 10 years now, maybe more. So that thumbprint, and let's unpack that for a second and make that correlation. So I'm giving Disney World, Disney Corporation, right, my thumbprint,
Company
so that
X, whoever,
Company
yeah. We won't pick on them. We'll just go with Company X.
Sure. Yeah, let me not pick on them. Nothing against Disney. But let's say I give Company X my thumbprint so that I can get into their theme park, or let's say I need that thumbprint to access some service, right? Like the kiosk, hotel, right? Whatever, to get access to my points. Well, that thumbprint's now in their database, and they're only storing like certain statistical data points on my thumbprint. It's translated into binary information in a computer.
Right.
Well, now they have that thumbprint. So if they have my thumbprint and they know what that correlation is, with all the
or at
data,
least the key components, the data components of the thumbprint, right? Okay.
Right. So they're storing that data in their computer. It's no different than a password, right? No different than a password. Or your Social Security number. So the issue is that I have with storing that thumbprint is you're sharing that biometric data that has value between you and that organization. Well, if somebody hacks their system, right, and there's a breach, we can talk about breaches if you want. That's a really good topic for cybersecurity. If there's a breach, then your thumbprint data has been stolen, along with probably hundreds of thousands of others.
Sure.
Now that malicious person has your thumbprint, right? And they can use it to unlock other systems. So depending on what another system may store in relation to your information, right, your private information, financial information, that malicious actor now has your thumbprint, right? And they might be able to utilize that for nefarious goals, right? So let's hope not, but that's a risk, right?
Right.
So just like your palm print, your retinal pattern, even your voice, there are some companies that actually use your voice now to activate access to different services. I know I won't pick on any one in particular, but there's some phone companies now that are allowing you to access your help desk records, right? To access customer service using your voice, right? You can literally use your voice as a password. Well, if I record your voice, David, then I can go get access to your account.
Right.
If I can easily and accurately mimic your voice on command, well, now I can use your voice to access your data, right? Kind of hard not to store your voice. I mean, we're talking right now, it's being stored on the internet.
Right.
One of those things, it's like, how do I protect that? But all of these things are things we need to start thinking about. Even your DNA is now being used by some companies, and that's pretty important information. We can talk about and dig into health data. That's probably the next thing that I would say we need to protect. And obviously, your industry, you understand the importance of health data. We're wanting to make health data portable. And in a perfect world, if there weren't any bad people out there, I think that's a wonderful idea in healthcare. We should all have portable health data where we can share that health data with all the providers, and my doctor here, my doctor there, all get the data and they can make decisions for my health. Absolutely fantastic idea. Also, insurance companies might utilize that for, inappropriate behaviors, right? They might take that data, or nefarious, like I said, malicious actors might take your health data and attempt to utilize that for nefarious means. You had a question. I'm sorry. You want to jump in?
No, you're fine. There's just so much in there that you've mentioned in that, that quick rundown. So I was just going to summarize. So social, number one.
Yep.
Biometrics, number two, and then your health data, number three. Is that okay?
Those are my top three. Yeah.
Those are your top three. Okay. And so a couple things within that. Yeah. Health data, maybe you've got a health condition. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say those three things, in my opinion, have value, right? They have tangible value today that people can use to sell on the black market.
Right. Or to your last point within the health data, maybe you have a condition that you don't want somebody to know about. They could use that as a tool for their ransomware, or something like that. Like pay us a Bitcoin.
And we won't
we'll tell everybody you've got cancer, or hepatitis or shingles, whatever,
Yeah, whatever. Exactly. I mean, it may not be that big a deal, but maybe you don't want your employer to know, or, whoever, right? Or the public. So, yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
Especially if you're a media personality or whatever, right? We can extrapolate 100 different directions.
Right. And so one of the things then within that, and that I've heard about, and probably a lot of people have heard about, but maybe they don't, certainly I'm not sure I recognize the importance of this then, as you talk about, particularly in the fingerprints or a password, a bad actor gets a hold of that in a data breach, and now they can access your account. And one of the ways there's two ways that I've heard that are sort of being promoted to fight against that, which is the first is that I've heard is the two-factor authentication. And we can break that down for the audience in just a second. And the other is a move to I don't know I forget the name of it. Like a Web 3.0 or what it's like using biometrics, but then you listed biometrics as a security gap. So is the answer to all that really the two-factor authentication, and can you kind of lay that out for what that is for people and how important it is?
Yeah, sure. So So typically, we'll take it even broader. We'll call it multi-factor authentication, MFA.
Okay.
Is typically what's called. Yeah. Two-factor is one subset of multi-factor, right? It's a multiple type of identifier, right? So in the past, we've had what has effectively been, depending on your perspective, one or two-factor, which is a username and a password, right? I have something that identifies who I am.
Right.
And then I have a secret, right? And that password is a secret.
Right.
Or at least ideally it should be a secret until it's not, right? So that's one of your authentication factors, right?
Okay.
So you have a password, it's supposed to be a secret, nobody knows it but you.
Right.
So that's, you have your identifier and your secret. Well, multi-factor authentication is, well, let's, instead of just having one secret, let's use multiple secrets, right? Or multiple avenues for identification. So, and in a lot of applications now utilize, like phone applications, right? You have an application on your phone that has synchronized with some with some internet server, some device that has a time synchronization.
Right.
So, and it gives you a password every 15 seconds, and it changes constantly every 15 seconds, right? And I won't give product names, but there's several of them. I have several on my phone. So whenever I go to log into a system, I type in my username, I type in my password, and it says, oh yeah, and give me the other thing too, right?
Right.
That's your multi-factor.
Right.
So whether it's a code or in some cases it calls you and tells you something, right? Or you have to answer the phone. So basically your phone number, answering your phone is a factor of authentication, right? Or a text message. It texts you some random password that's unique at that particular moment in time, right? All of these are
good for 5 minutes.
It's good for 5 minutes or 50 seconds or whatever the admin set it at, right? So those are multiple factors of authentication, MFA. So
okay.
Yep.
And would you say that that's pretty critical that people set that up on all their bank accounts, on all their, everything they can?
Absolutely. If a vendor offers you the opportunity to use multi-factor authentication, you should absolutely use multi-factor because it's one more. Is it perfect? No. I mean, eventually there will be somebody who figures out how to crack that, and I can actually go through an example of somebody who cracked multi-factor authentication. It's in a very elaborate process. It's not really relevant for any normal user. I mean, it's not like you're going to get hacked in that way very easily. They put a lot of resources, but in general, 99.999% of the time, having at least one extra factor of authentication, whether it's a code, an app, a phone call, a text, will lower your chances of getting breached as far as breaching your authentication in that system, having somebody else being able to masquerade as you. It reduces that by an enormous factor currently. Okay. So yes, short answer is yes.
Okay. And then obviously not using password as my password is probably critical.
I mean, as long as you use upper and lowercase letters, 1, 2, 3, 4 at the end of bang, you should be good. But yeah.
Sure.
But no.
Okay. And so you mentioned earlier about breaches, right? Seems like there's always a breach. I'm going to try not to pick on any one company, but we'll pick on several years ago. I believe the Fed's Office of Management and Budget had a major hack. Okay. Yes, then what? Right? Is everybody who works for the feds the next day have fake credit cards in their name? And what next after a big breach? I get that in the mail and all right. So what next? Both, I suppose, in the context of what should I do as an individual person who's notified about a breach? And B, what are the consequences out there in the cyber universe? Like I said, fake credit cards, a fake you somewhere. Like what happens next?
Well, that's a whole podcast in itself. But I'm going to condense. So let me address the first question, the first part of your question. As an individual user, right? As an individual citizen, a private person, I get a letter in the mail that says, you're a vet and the VA was hacked and, your data was in the data that was stolen, right? Crap, right? 20 years ago, people were like, oh my God, there's a breach and I've lost my private information. Now it's like, oh, I got another one this week.
Right.
Like nobody cares anymore, which we'll get to the consequences here. That's three more conversations down the road, but sure. Yeah, we'll come back to that one. So as a private person, I've been breached. Okay. And they typically are like, well, in order to like alleviate some of our culpability and legal liability, they don't say that, but that's what it says. We're giving you free credit protection, right?
Right.
Because we got hacked and didn't spend money on cybersecurity, we're going to pay $30 a year for you to have free to you, credit
monitoring
protection, right?
Or whatever. Yeah.
Credit monitoring or whatever, right? Well, ironically, as a private person, you should probably have that already, right? You should probably already have some kind of credit monitoring, whether it's you purchased it directly or through your bank or through one of your many credit cards. If you have credit cards, they typically offer it as a service. I know many of my credit cards offer it as a free service now, and you could even see your credit score. So what I would recommend, and caveat, not a lawyer, what I would say is, you should be constantly looking at your credit report, and not just one, but all three. Technically, there's four. Everybody says there's a big three. There's really four credit reporting agencies, but at least the big three, right?
Okay.
So Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. You should always be looking at those three. And now, because of, ironically, so many breaches, data breaches, and fraud, the government is requiring them to give you at least one free credit report per year, right? Per agency. So that means there's three.
Right.
You should go get those every year, and you should probably also be monitoring your credit, on a regular basis through either credit monitoring or through your bank or whatever. I would also recommend, if you're not actively seeking credit for some reason, freeze your credit report. Because if you freeze it, then no one can take out credit in your name without unlocking your account. And to unlock it, they have to contact you directly. So if Equifax calls you and says, hey, we're unlocking your credit report so you can get this credit card that you didn't know about, there's a red flag, right? So I would recommend doing that at all times, right? And if you can.
That sounds like the multi-factor authentication of the credit report world. It is almost.
No, it is. That's absolutely right. So if you want to, and even if you want to say get a car loan, you have to call and you have to unlock your credit report, your account, so that credit report can be run by the bank or the car company or whatever. And they can release your credit report to them so they can make a decision whether to give you credit or not, right? And then once they're done, that process done, refreeze it, right? Relock it, or at least monitor. Now, there's two different things you can do with your credit report. I don't want to spend too much time on credit reports, but you can freeze your credit report, which means nobody can do anything unless it's unlocked. And that's a very cumbersome process, but it's cumbersome intentionally, right?
Right.
You want it to be cumbersome. And then you can also temporarily hold your, I can't remember the term. It's either hold or lock or whatever your credit. It's like happens for like 3 months. So if you feel like you've been subjected to fraud, or if you get a fraud report or something like that, you can go in and you can automatically do that. It doesn't cost
like a temporary. Okay.
It's a temporary thing, and by law they have to let you do that for free, but it only lasts for 90 days, I think, or 6 months, something like that. But you can keep doing it for free, but it's got a timer.
Okay.
If you freeze your account, it's frozen until you unfreeze it. But some reporting agencies charge you for that. Why? Because they can, right?
Right.
So anyway, so that's all I'll say about that. But as a company, if you've been breached, that's a whole litany of activities that you're going to have to go down. And it's going to cost you a lot of money too. So let's hold that for a second. We'll come back to that. But yeah, if you're an individual, like I said, I would monitor your credit report all the time. As far as protecting your personal data, again, that's a whole nother, I guess, a whole podcast by itself as well. So did I answer the first part of the question, I think? Yeah,
no, the first part was kind of, the whole question was around to like, what next? You get notified, what next? And you said, hey, you're probably going to get told about, the credit monitoring. You should probably have that already. Credit freezes or credit locks. And again, folks, some of this is off the top of the head here, so everybody can go out and check their own links. I know that the free annual report that Robert mentioned is annual credit annualcredit.com or annualcreditreport.com.
Something like, yeah.
It's not freecreditreport.com. You know, some of these places, right. It's funny that it's almost like they masquerade, and to your point, then to upsell a fee or something like that. So yeah, I think you covered that. But then the second part was related to, you know, is somebody going to go out, somebody meaning the hacker, the bad guy, are they going out tomorrow and starting fraud, or is there like a holding period where they have to go sell it on the dark web or whatever? Like when after a breach does this stuff start to impact my life?
In most cases, and here's where, you know, I talked about earlier data that has value, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of your personal data has value. Your home address, you know, your employer, you know, your employment, where you work and stuff, that doesn't have value. Your social security number in combination with your, you know, your name, your address, your mother's maiden name, that aggregation of data, that has value. And I'm going to come back to aggregation too. You know, I said social security number is very important, but your social security number by itself is just a number, right?
Right.
You got to tie it to something.
Right.
So in answer to your question, you get notified that some company's been breached. At that point, you have to make a decision. It's like, okay, well, what did they breach, right? If it's a very large insurance company whose name I won't mention that was breached, you know, recently in the last couple of years, if it's insurance data, well, now they've got probably if they've got any one of your records from the insurance company, they've got your name, they've got your address, they've got a lot of your protected health information, probably your social security number if it was post Obamacare, right? And they have probably your children's names. They probably have your spouse's name, and they probably have lots of your doctor's names, and maybe even some previous addresses, right? So they're going to take that data, all of that data, in aggregate, right? So now I've got a lot of data points about you that I can aggregate together to create a picture of David, right? So now I've got your name, your address, your social security number, and possibly some other information about you. I can use that information to go open a credit card, right? Now, is that going to happen immediately? Probably not. Because what typically happens is hackers will breach the security of an organization, get into their systems and steal large quantities of personal information, PII, you know, personal information, and they will personally identifiable information, but anybody wants to know what PII means. So it's a term that gets thrown around a lot. So it's personally identifiable information. So it's information about you to identify who you are. So they take all that data in aggregate, and they take your data plus 100,000 other people's data they just stole, and they go sell it in a batch to somebody, and that gets put onto an auction, a marketplace. There's like marketplaces that even have like help desks and like service level agreements for support on the dark web. It's insane. So they sell this data in large batches on the, you know, to somebody, and those organizations then resell it, slice and dice it, do data analytics on it, figure out which information is worth more. They might even go so far as to do analytics on the data and figure out, okay, well, I'm going to take the top 10% of wage earners in this data set that we stole, and I'm going to sell that to somebody because they're going to go get credit cards or buy fake houses or boats or whatever. I'm going to take all the data from these lower wage earners, and maybe their information's worth like 10 cents a piece, right? 10 cents, but I've got 100,000 of them. And at 100,000 units, 10 cents is a significant amount of money, right?
Sure.
You know, maybe you've got some people who have more valuable data. Their data might be worth $1. Now, you know, my data is worth $1, kind of insulting, but it's worth $1 for somebody who stole it to sell it to somebody else. That person is going to do a lot more than $1 worth of
$1 damage. Yeah.
If they use it, right? So that whole marketplace takes time for that to like propagate out to where it actually has an impact on you. So you do have a little bit of time to take action if you haven't already, right? Like I said, hopefully you've already got a credit freeze in place, or at the very least you're monitoring. Hopefully, you know, you have, you know, change all your passwords, right? Obviously for that organization. But if you're using the same password, you know, for every service that you use on the internet, you should.
I'm sure no listener to this is doing. Nobody anywhere is doing that.
Yeah, change all your passwords, right? You know, I know, again, don't want to pick on anybody in particular, but I think it was a year, maybe 2 years ago, There's a social media network that I utilize for professional reasons only. It's a professional social media network that got hacked, and literally, I think a week after I was notified that they got hacked, I had somebody reach out to me by email, my personal email that I only use that's not visible. So I knew they had my real data. They sent an email to my personal email address and said, "Hey, we've got your password," and they had my password in the email. I was like, "Oh shit, these people actually have my real password," and said, "We're going to use it for blah 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 if you don't give us $10 on Bitcoin." And I was like, "No, I'm just going to change my password."
You're right.
So, I mean, but there are people who will, and I'm not, I don't want to denigrate anybody, but may fall for that, right? They're like, "Oh my gosh, they've got my password. I'm going to give them $10 not to use my password."
Right.
Without thinking about it, maybe they're scared, maybe they're heightened, whatever. It's like spur of the moment. They get taken off guard. Obviously in that situation, you just go change your password.
Right.
No harm, no foul, right? But hypothetically, if that person had, let's say, bought information about my banking account,
right,
they had my name and my password, and I didn't know it for even 5-6 days, they could go into my bank and transfer money, right?
Right.
Now, there's a lot of protections in place. I mean, it's not as easy as that sounds, but if you're talented and you think this through, there are ways that you could potentially clean out my bank account, right?
Right.
You had that. So the answer to your question, now very long-winded, is if you found out that you're part of a breach, take a look at what was stolen, what's the organization, what could that data be used for, and then take action appropriately, right? If your bank's been breached, your bank account's been breached, well, that's a lot more serious than if you're, say, for some people, Facebook or Twitter profile's been breached, right?
Right.
Maybe they can read some text you don't want them to read, but who cares?
Right.
Some people might, but I don't. But but if they breach my bank account, well, that's going to affect me.
That's
right?
more serious.
So,
yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so I guess the answer is it depends, but don't wait. Take action.
Don't wait.
Don't wait. That's the answer.
Okay.
Do something. And if you don't know what to do, ask somebody. Right? Ask your cousin or your nephew who's in IT. Hey, what should I do?
But ask quick. Don't wait. Right. Get a move on. Okay. All right. No, that's really good. And so, okay. So there's these bad actors out there. They're trying to get this data. They sell the data. As you said, it feels a little demeaning that my data might be worth $1 or whatever, or if I'm in the poor bucket, it might be 10 cents. But a couple things you mentioned in there that I think are worth breaking down and kind of wrapping together, to mix metaphors, which is that this is not somebody in a basement someplace. There's a level of sophistication these days, it sounds like to me, to these people. So you and the two clues you mentioned to that, as well as a real life experience I recently had, which is that they're running analytics on the data. Right. So that means you have an analytics team or person.
Yes.
So there's that, as well as you mentioned, like the ability they're quickly moving. You got a breach through a social media and they said, hey, we'll use your password. So they're hopping on it quickly. And again, that breach, if I recall, was quite large. So, I mean, the fact that they're moving on it so quickly indicates a level of staffing that is somewhat impressive. Yeah. And then the other thing is, for example, this is an offline hack, if you will, but it could have gotten them my data, which is I received a letter recently on U.S. bank letterhead and saying that there was a problem with my account and they needed me to send them a picture of my driver's license or to validate my account. Now, fortunately, and I'm willing to mention there,
really legit too.
It looked extremely legit.
Yes.
And the clue for me was I hadn't done business with U.S. Bank for a number of years. I'd, previously had, but not for 5 years, let's say.
Right. Sure.
So I did not call the number on the form.
Good.
I looked up I looked up a number for U.S. Bank for their fraud department and called them. And I'm willing to mention them here. We've been very careful to not pick on any companies because their fraud department was very responsive, and that's great. And they looked up, no, we don't have anybody trying to file an account in your name. They did a lot of work. I was on the phone for a while, but they were very responsive. So kudos to them. But this is a letter that I kept a copy of it in case something happens, but it looks like it's from U.S. Bank. The only way that I knew it wasn't is that I don't currently do business with them. So these 3 points to say, these folks appear to be quite sophisticated.
Oh, very sophisticated. And I'm gonna address that, but I do want to point out something very important that you brought up, which is very insightful and people should take note of. If you get a letter from somebody that says that you've been defrauded or that they need information, never, ever, ever click on the link if it's an email, or call the number in the email or on the letter you received in the mail. If, like, for in your instance, like you said, it looked like it's from U.S. Bank. Okay, well, maybe it is. In some cases, maybe it is. Maybe it's not. Typically, banks won't ask you for information like that. That's red flag number one. Obviously, red flag number two is I don't have an account at U.S. Bank, so okay. But in some cases, they look really legit. I got almost pwned about a month ago. I actually posted it on that same professional social network as an example because it looks so legit. It almost got me. I mean, I was about to click on it, and I was like, something doesn't seem quite right.
Something's off.
I did a little bit of analysis. Even the links in the email were actually links. They looked like they were legitimate links. They almost got me. But to your point, I didn't call their number or click on their link. I looked the number up for that particular organization. It was an internet service that I use, right? For internet access. I called the company, and they're like, "Oh, yep, that's not us. That's fake. We're getting a lot of those, right?" So, to your point, it's not their fault that they're being masqueraded as, right? It's not the company's fault. Now, if they get breached, that's another conversation.
Right.
But if somebody's masquerading as them, it's not their fault, and they're typically very responsive. But to your point, and I want to reiterate that is always look the number up from a legitimate source to call the organization, right? Because the number in the email or the letter is not going to be legit. It's going to be straight to their help desk and their call center. Which, let's come back to that point about sophistication. Used to, there was hackers, and they were, one or two or maybe three people in a basement or, wherever, who were coming up with, spam, trying to get you to do X, Y, and Z. There are whole criminal enterprises, and I want to stress the word enterprise, organizations who have hundreds, in some cases, thousands of employees, right, who are working for them just to perpetuate fraud, right? To create spam. They have entire IT teams that develop malware and develop spam campaigns. They have call centers of people waiting for you to call the bogus number, right? And answer the phone and try to get your information and get you to give them a credit card number. They have help desks, right? I mean, this was the funniest thing. I discovered this years ago when I was doing some research on these malware organizations. Some of these organizations have help desks where you can purchase malware from them, like software to embed in your own malware campaign, and they develop exploits. And an exploit is, like a virus, right? It's some piece of code that does something bad that they want it to do, right? So you can buy software from them, and then you can embed it into your malware that you're deploying to somebody's machine or putting in your emails. And if their software doesn't work, you can call them and say, "Hey, your malware isn't working correctly. Help me work through this." And they will have service level agreements. You can pay for support for them to help you fix your malware so that you can defraud people. It's insane.
Did you just tell me that there's people out there offering white labeled malware? Is that basically what you just said?
With support contracts.
with support departments. Right now I'm envisioning somewhere in China, India, Malaysia, wherever.
Eastern Europe.
Eastern Europe, or maybe, I don't know, Sandusky, Ohio. Wherever. I'm just envisioning the HR department for the hacker company, right? Like, why do you, the typical, hey, why do you want to work here? I want to rob Americans. Oh, okay. Well, welcome aboard.
Sounds great. We're glad to have you. Yeah. I've never thought about that. Yeah. How do you, I'll tell you a story maybe offline about some folks I met at a hacker conference who tried to recruit one of my colleagues and how that went. Not talking about that here. That was pretty funny. But yeah, those organizations, like they're literally, and I mean like enterprise with a capital E, right? They're corporations that are funded, in some cases funded by nation states, whose names I won't mention because I don't want to pick on anybody, but large nation states, in other places. Typically those malware organizations, enterprises like that, to your point, they actually don't exist in the US because the FBI has a very, the FBI actually is doing a pretty good job. I mean, you have to understand volume, right? Case volume. Right. They're overwhelmed, right, with the number of cases that they have to follow up on. But the ones that they focus on, they typically do find the people that they're after. Now, they might have 20,000 cases and they're working on 5. But those 5, they're probably going to find out who those people are.
Right.
If those people are in the United States, bad things will happen to them, right? If they're not in the United States, which they typically aren't, they're in countries that don't have extradition with the U.S. Therefore, the FBI typically, their fraud department and their cyber crimes division, they're a lot of really good, very talented people. I've met many of them. I'll give them a lot of credit. They're really smart people. They hire good folks. They typically find who those people are. Unfortunately, they're sitting in, Chechnya, and they can't do anything about it. They know who the person is. They even have an address. They might even have a satellite photo of their house. They can't do anything about it, right?
Right. There's no enforcement ability unless that local government cares to enforce it.
And chooses to work with us. Right. Absolutely. That's the frustrating part. That's the really frustrating part. Yeah.
So given the sophistication and the volume and the size of all these organizations and all these attacks, how does a company ever even figure out that they've been breached?
Okay, let's talk organization companies. So there's quite a few really good websites out there. One of my favorite is haveibeenpwned.com, or is it .org? I'll get you a link later.
Sure.
There are a number of open source public websites where a company, just in general, if you're just sitting there one day thinking, you know what, I wonder if I've been breached and don't know it. There are actually websites where you can go and do a search, right? They have basically slice and dice databases of breached data. And I'll give them credit. Most of the really good ones, they sanitize a lot of the private information. But you can go in and type in like your company name and maybe like an employee or just your company name and say, does my company name show up in any breach data? And because these companies, they actually go out to the dark web. They pull down all these lists of breach data, or at least like the, in some cases the surface data, because a lot of it's for sale or they don't typically buy it, but they can see if data is out there and they pull it down, and you can go in and query the database like Google, right? You're basically in their system Googling your company name or your personal name if you want to see if your name shows up or your company name shows up in any breaches. And it might, and occasionally it does. And I've actually worked for a company where they didn't even know they were breached. I was not working in the security department at the time, just FYI. But I looked in and we basically did a search, and it's like, oh, there's a whole set of data. Oh, there's 5 people I know in the next door department whose names and passwords are on this database for anyone to buy. It's like, oh crap, we should probably do something about that. But there's a lot of sites like that. Now, if you feel like you really have been breached, and you have an IT department that has evidence, like if you're running a security incident and event management tool, a SIM tool is what they call it, where you're actually tracking, keeping logs and running analytics and doing queries, and have agents, and I say agents like software agents running that are looking for malicious activity on your network, and you think you've been breached. I mentioned the FBI Cyber Crimes Division. You can always pick up the phone and call them, and they'll be happy to help you and walk you through, what steps you can take. So there's some really good literature out there. There's plenty of products out there. I would say that if you want to set up a event management or a monitoring program, there's all kinds of resources out there for you and tools, both open source, which is free, and paid services. But if you aren't keeping logs, if you're not tracking network activity on your network as a company, you're not going to know you're breached, right? You've got to start somewhere. You've got to be proactive. You need to take an active hand in making sure that you set up a monitoring program internally in your company, because I can guarantee you that the hackers aren't going to tell you that they're in your system, right? Then they're not going to give you, if they're good, any indication that they're in your system, right? And then what you're going to have is what we call a persistent threat, which means somebody's hacked your company, your network, your systems, your servers, your databases, whatever, and they're in there, and they're going to try to stay in there as long as they can,
right,
and harvest as much as they can and cover their tracks, right? So I said the short answer to your question is you're probably not going to know you've been breached.
Okay.
Unless you're actively monitoring your network and monitoring your data. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do to set up a program like that. I'm not going to say it's not hard. It's very complicated, but I would definitely recommend taking a proactive approach. If you don't know what you're doing, hire somebody, right? Hire somebody who is even if they're a mid-junior level cyber analyst that just knows a little bit about network traffic and logs. I mean, start somewhere, start anywhere, start monitoring, right? Capture logs, start monitoring network activity, start monitoring every time somebody logs in, keep a record of that. If somebody's logging in at weird times from weird places, that's what we call an indicator of compromise, right? That means something weird's happening. I should probably look into that, right? That's an event. But monitoring, keeping logs, that's probably your first best step. But even working backwards from that, right, at a very high level, you should, as an organization, know and understand what data you have and what systems you have that have value, right? If you don't know what your data is, if you don't know what your data is worth, how do you know what you've lost, right?
Right.
And when it is lost, how do you know what it's worth, right? What's the impact to me? What's the impact to my customers? Because there are very serious financial and legal implications of getting breached. So if you're a company of a certain, of a specific size, there's size limitations, and the consequences are commensurate with the size of the organization and the value of the data. And
right,
as you probably know, losing health data has very specific legal.
Yeah, HIPAA breaches have very, very specific rules on how those are treated under federal law. Yeah.
Yep, and usually they're enforced, but we won't talk about that. But yeah, knowing what your data is, I would call it labeling, categorizing, compartmentalizing, and controlling your sensitive data. Right? You need to know what you have, you need to know what it's worth, and you need to know what the risk is of losing it, and what the consequences and/or the value, the impact to your organization of losing that data. Right? So if you're a mom and pop. Most folks are like, hey, I don't really have enough money. We don't make enough money to really worry about cybersecurity. You may think that until someone locks out your entire, POS system, and you can't do any business.
Can't do business, yeah.
And you can't do business at all. Well, how much does your business sell on a daily basis, and what's your net profit per day on that business? That's what your data is worth, right?
Right.
That even if you're a really small business, right? And then it grows exponentially from there, depending on the size of the organization, right?
That's an interesting calculation, and because to your point, getting totally locked out. What's that?
So that's the basic calculation. That's not even the financial and legal consequences that you may be penalized for losing that data.
Right.
That's just the impact to your bottom line on a daily basis.
Yeah. And so that brings up an interesting question, which is, in your background, we mentioned that you've worked in a wide range of company sizes. Mm-hmm. If I am listening to this and I am a 4-employee business, a family-owned, small business, even 20 people, right? Just something small. the amount of effort it feels like I have to undertake to fight off the wolves at the door is huge. Yep. Is it really, or are there some small steps that the small business owner, who young entrepreneur, old entrepreneur, whatever, could take, who might listen to this? Do you have some tactical steps? You've alluded to several, but are there some tactical steps that are more specific to the small business owner?
Yeah, I'll start by saying any business of any size, and not just because I work in cybersecurity, but in general, you should probably allocate around 5% of your budget to cybersecurity. If you do business on the internet, which there aren't many businesses these days who don't. I'm sure they exist. I can't honestly think of any off the top of my head. But if you do business on the internet, you should have someone in your organization, whether it's you, if you're the owner, as a one-person startup, or if you've got 20 people, you should have at least one person whose full-time job is cybersecurity. And as far as tactical steps, there's tactical steps. I would say the easiest entry to cybersecurity, if you're a small business, is, and I'm not pushing any individual organization, but you've got basically the big four when it comes to cloud, AWS, Microsoft, Google, and IBM, right? IBM's a growing force in the cloud. So those are the big four now. There's 20 or 30 other mid-size organizations that help you get onto the cloud and provide services. Almost all of those organizations, it'll seem like sticker shock at first. They offer cybersecurity services, right? They offer data protection, data loss prevention tools, security event monitoring tools, right? So you can monitor traffic and make sure nobody's logging in at weird times and masquerading as one of your employees and getting root permission to your server and stealing your data, right? Those services all are available for a fee, right? By all of the big cloud providers. Now, it may seem like sticker shock at first. Oh my gosh, I'm paying, $50 per month, per person in my company for all of these, monitoring and compliance services. It typically starts around $10 per person for really basic security products, and then it goes up to anywhere to like 30, 40, 50 if you get the whole, the whole suite of tools. The whole package. But $50 a month per person for not just the security suite, but also access to the products. You get your Office suite, you get your data access, email, all that stuff. Throw the security on there. Work with one of their people, their engineers to help you get things configured. Almost all of them will help you. And again, I'm not pushing any one company particular services. They all have these service offerings, but you can essentially pay that upcharge for your services, for your cloud services to get security. And when you compare that to what it costs to have a full-time equivalent employee for a year, which, burdened rate, you're probably looking at anywhere from $100,000 to $200,000 a year, if you include overhead and everything.
Right.
You're probably not going to spend anywhere near that for buying the services from the cloud provider, right? So they call it a CSP, a cloud service provider. It's just yet another acronym.
Another acronym.
Another acronym. So, that would probably be tactically my first step as a small business owner, is just buy security. That's what you're going to do. You're going to buy security. And then when you grow to the point where you've got 50, 60, 100 people in your organization, you're going to have a full-time cybersecurity team, of 2, 3, 4, 5 people, right? However many. Like I said, 5% of your budget at least should be cybersecurity if you do it on the internet. And part of that budget is buying products and services. Part of it's buying people to handle those products and services, and then build in-house tools, right?
Right.
And there's, the flip side of that, if you've got folks, if you're a young startup and you know what you're doing and you're all tech savvy and somebody wants to be the cyber person, guy or gal, there's a lot of free tools out there, free open source tools. There's things like Snort, OSIM, ElkStack, OSEC. Those are all free tools that you can get to do security monitoring. Nothing in the world is free.
Right.
So even though it's open source, it's free. you still have to hire somebody that knows how to use them, implement them, and maintain them, right? There's a cost to everything, right? And when that stuff breaks, somebody's got to fix it, and or you're paying for a support contract, right? So there's a hidden cost to open source, and I'm not against open source, love open source. I'm just saying nothing's free.
Yeah, nothing's free. Got to be aware of that.
But those are your tactical early options. Like I said, Amazon, Google, AWS. I said that twice. IBM. Microsoft. They all have products. They all have engineers, and they're happy to help you. They're happy to help you because they're hoping that over time, as your company grows, you'll buy more stuff.
You'll buy more. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of time they'll give you free consulting if you're buying their products, which is great, and they're really good to work with. And then there's open source, right? So, and then there's hiring people.
So that's good. So that's some great advice. We've talked on this front. We've talked about the basics of breaches and what data is at risk and how people can protect themselves, but it's usually been from the stance of a grown up. How can I got kids, you got kids, and lots of people have kids. How do you protect your kids' data?
Yeah. I've got grown up kids, but yes, I had kids.
Yeah, I mean, sure.
Yeah. That was a huge concern for me, having kids growing up in the early stages of the internet boom, because I literally, my kids literally grew up through like the proliferation of social media, right? Like it's weird. This is always weird to think that Facebook's only been around for 14 years. Do you realize that? Isn't that weird? It seems like it's been around forever.
Like open to the public, right? Because before that, it was like just college students. Because I remember being on it a few years before that. But I think you're right. Like open to the public.
Right. Before or after Zuckerberg stole the idea.
Yeah.
Whatever. Anyway, so Facebook, the Facebook, which became Facebook, which is now Meta, has only been around since I believe 2006, I think 2006 or 7. I'm not sure.
14, 15 years. Yeah.
Twitter's even way younger. Twitter's I don't think more than 10 years old. Maybe I think it was 2011, maybe. But anyway, I'll look it up later. But total tangent. But yes, kids, right? Kids and their data. How do you protect kids and their data? Keep them off the internet. That's my. Keep them off the internet, or at least until they're 14, right? That's right. That is my best advice to any parent: is don't let them use that shit. Keep them off social media. All it does is destroy their self-esteem and make them little phone monsters that do this all day long.
Right.
Do this all day long. It's not healthy. But I'm not a psychologist, but I am a parent. At least I play one on the internet. I would say, if you're not going to keep them off the internet and you're going to let them use social media, which you probably are these days, because, in most cases, if your kids aren't on social media and aren't using the internet, well, let me back up. Social media is I would say is a dangerous topic. The internet, every kid's using the internet for school these days.
For all sorts of stuff.
From kindergarten on, it's insane. They all have Chromebooks, and they're all, most of my friends' kids who are in school don't even have textbooks anymore, even in high school. Wow. Their textbooks are on their Chromebook, which is crazy. So anyway, they're going to use the internet whether you want them to or not.
Right. Unless you're
Amish, they're using the internet, right? And hell, even they got phones now, I think. Anyway, so but if your kids are using social media, don't put personal information out there.
Right.
Like first name, and that's all they need on there. The company typically wants their birth date, so you can control what they see, or allegedly, make sure they're using the kid-friendly version,
age-appropriate,
age-appropriate Twitter, age-appropriate Facebook, whatever, right? If those things really exist, but they have to have their birth date, but don't make the birth date visible, right? It should never be publicly visible. Don't post photos unless you absolutely, unless it's scenery or something posting pictures of your kids on the internet, which I know is any parent who has a child who's 13 or 14 and has social media accounts, especially Instagram, they're encouraging you to post photos all the time, right?
Right.
But I recommend against it. I'm going to stay away from some aspects of this question because my answers are going to not be possible for most parents in the modern age.
Sure.
But as far as protecting their data, don't post anything very personal, right? No publicly posting birth dates. And even if you do, like some people like to get the happy birthdays, don't put the year at least. Like anything you can protect, do. Like less information is better, right?
Less is better.
Less is better.
Less is better. Private profiles, things like, yeah.
As a parent, I would make sure that you have veto power on anybody they friend, right? If they're going to accept a new friend request, you should check it out, right? Make sure it's a real person. Make sure it's not a pedophile. Make sure it's, not a bot, et cetera, right? Have veto power over, who they friend, what sites they they go to, what they like. Because if you like a site or if you like a profile or you like a group, then it now has your information. Most people don't realize that. When you hit like, it shares certain pieces of public, anything you have on your profile that's public immediately gets shared with the organization or the site that you like. Yes. Yeah. Most people don't realize that. So it depends on the app. But I'll take a step back and we'll talk about more from a technical perspective, right? Things that people don't typically think about. Let's say your kid has a cell phone, right? And how many new cell phones do people get, right? You get a new cell phone like every couple of years, right?
Right.
What do you do with that cell phone?
It's pretty common.
Yeah, you throw it away, you give it to the phone company, when you go buy the new phone, you whatever, right? Wipe that phone. Completely wipe it. I would recommend first deleting like intentionally deleting everything on that phone that's personal, like photos, all your notes, your email applications, all that stuff. Delete those. And then do a factory reset on the phone. Completely wipe the phone, right? Take everything off of it before you dispose of it. Because I can tell you, having run a couple of hacker teams, we used to buy phones off the internet, used phones, just so we could reverse engineer the phones and suck all the data off of them to use for an experimental data set, right? We sanitized the data before we used it, but oh my God, we used to buy hard drives and cell phones off of like eBay for like $5 a piece, like old ones. And you would be really surprised at some of the crap we found, things that I can't talk about in a public forum that children may listen to. So we found some interesting things that people didn't even bother to delete, right? It's crazy. So yeah, wipe that stuff, and back to credit ratings, right? Credit bureaus. You want to protect your kids' credit information too. Even if they're under 18, they probably should not have a profile on any of the credit bureaus. I recommend go to the credit bureaus, do a pull or call the credit bureau, and sometimes you'll have to provide like a copy of your driver's license to prove that you're their parent.
Right.
Go out and do a pull on your kids, right? They shouldn't have a credit report. If they do, that's a red flag.
Right.
That means somebody has probably created or tried to use their information, their PII, for some reason to create to get a credit card, buy a car, rent a house, rent an apartment. It's insane, right? So if they have a credit report, then take a look at that report and see what's on it, right? Because I guarantee you, if you didn't know about it, anything on that credit report is not anything that you did for that kid, right? So put a freeze. You can put a freeze on a minor's account, and it's basically, and just like in adults, for a minor, a credit freeze is free and it's permanent until you turn it off. So for a minor, it's free.
That's
I recommend doing that. Yeah, go out and check their credit report, and if they have one, put a freeze on it. And you can, I believe, request the bureau once you've identified you're their parent or guardian. You can request to have a credit account, profile or whatever you want, whatever they call it, created for your kid, and then put a freeze on it if you want. So be proactive. You can be proactive in that way. So. But those are some big red flags that,
Yeah, absolutely. And so now that for an hour we've been scaring everybody, right?
Yeah.
With here's what can happen, here's what to watch out for. These guys are sophisticated. I mean, like I said, it sounds like something out of a Bond movie or a Bourne movie or whatever. Some of the levels that these guys have out there and the steps you have to go through. Are there are there silver linings to all this for the average person? I mean, I can't imagine every human being on the internet is a target, right? Some people are probably more than others. So are there silver linings out there, or really no? And everybody really needs to step up to the plate of diligence when it comes to cybersecurity?
Well, I would say that every single person who was on the internet is a target for some nefarious entity out there. So yes, you need to be proactive. It's, do I want to live in a perfect world? Yes. Do I live in a perfect world? No. Am I going to let my, 4-year-old daughter wander around the mall by herself while I go get a smoothie? No, right? Is it likely that anyone's going to kidnap her? The probability is actually pretty low if you actually look at real statistics. It's probably pretty low, and somebody's probably going to pick her up and try to figure out where her parents are, right? Because in general, most people are good people, right?
Right.
But you just don't want to be at the mall on that one day that bad person's there, right?
Right.
That's not going to be a good day for you or your kid, right? So yeah, everyone's a target. You can do very minor things to I would say improve your baseline security score as a personal individual very easily and ramp up very quickly, right? Just little things like having, I know it's annoying and obnoxious, but have long, complicated passwords, right? That's, having a password that's more than 8 characters long, as in 9 or more, and in some cases 10 or even 12 or more, exponentially increases the amount of time it takes to hack a password, right? There's all kinds of free and open source tools out there for breaking passwords, and breaking hashes and rainbow tables and blah, 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 right? That's a whole other conversation, right? Just having a long, complex password, every multiple factor of complexity in your password, right? Upper, lowercase letters, having numbers, having weird symbols, right? Having all special characters.
Different ones for different sites.
Yeah, that was number 2. You beat me to it, right? Have a different password for every site. Because like I said, if you get hacked on, say, that professional social network and they've got your username and password and you happen to use the same password for every site, well, they're going to go try those. They're going to go try every single social media site to see if that password works. Trust me, they will, because they did, right? A lot of folks were getting hacked on different sites. They were getting compromised because they had the same password. So always have different passwords, right? Password complexity, different passwords for every site. Don't share your personal information on the web, right? Your Facebook profile, your Twitter account, your Instagram. Don't be putting your home address out there. Don't share personal information. About your. I'm not going to go through the list, but just be private. You can be social without exposing everything, right?
Right.
Just don't share so much personal information. Again, personal recommendation. People are going to do what they're going to do. I don't recommend putting photos of children, on social media sites. A lot of people do. If you want to, great. If you have a lot of friends on social media and you are only sharing those with your friends, not publicly, cool, right? Use the tools. And one thing I wanted to say and come back to is, that social media sites, companies, apps, whatever you want to call them, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, Reddit, all these different organizations and their apps, they get a bad rap for having bad security or getting, using your data, which they do. They do use your data for marketing purposes, whatever. But just in case you weren't aware, you are the product, if you didn't know that. Yeah. If you're using a free app like Facebook or Twitter.
Or any app, really, an exercise app, right?
Nothing is free. If it's free, you are the product, right? They're harvesting your data so that they can sell it to other organizations, whether it's for marketing purposes, demographics, whatever, right? So they're harvesting data. So don't share anything you don't absolutely have to share or want to share. And if an app requires you to share something you don't want to share, don't use the app. You have the choice, right? No one's making you use it, for Lord's sake, right? So But those are very little things. But my point on that was these companies, they actually do have cybersecurity teams and strategic and tactical, focuses on trying to actually protect your data. They don't want anybody to have your data except the ones they're selling it to, right?
Right. Yeah, to your point, because you're the product, I don't want somebody else to get to the product, then I'm giving away my product. And yeah, that makes a lot of sense, actually. And yeah, I can only imagine, I think to your implied point there, how much continuous assault those companies have to be under. They have to be dedicating resources to that. So yeah, they do get a bad rap, but they're obviously have to be working hard, or it'd be even worse, right? They probably couldn't even function.
Oh yeah. One thing people don't realize, it's kind of funny. I know some folks who work for a very popular social media company, but one of the biggest in the world, if you can, get my meaning. And they laugh at how the general public is always complaining about, the search algorithms or what shows up in their feed, and why am I seeing all this crap I don't want to see? Which, to be fair, is not that frequent, and also, to be fair, it's not an app that I personally like to use, but people use it, and so I use it because I have friends that use it. So what have you? But what they don't see is all the things that get blocked.
Right.
Have you ever noticed in your feed on that particular social media platform that we won't name, how much porn you don't see, how much malware ads and inappropriate ads you don't see? Think about that for a second.
Yeah, you don't know what you don't know. I mean, yeah.
You don't. Yeah, and I can tell you from knowing the people who work on that side of the fence, they block a lot of crap, right?
Wow.
So they're actually working. They're working in your favor. We can talk about censorship as a whole nother topic, but as far as data security, they're actually doing a pretty good job, because you don't realize how much crap you're not seeing.
Right.
So they're actually working pretty diligently to make the platform fairly safe for you to use. Like I said, they don't want anybody stealing your data except them.
They're using it. They don't want somebody stealing it. Yeah.
They're monetizing the data that you're giving them. Let me be clear about that. Let me say that again. They're monetizing and selling data that everybody complains about that you are giving them.
Yeah.
Giving. So stop complaining. If you want to complain, stop using the platform.
Right. Yeah, that's the best opt-out, right? And I think, and that's a good summation. I think you've given some good tactical stuff along the way, some strategic things for both businesses and individuals. But I think a big through line is what, to everything we've said, and we'll kind of use this to wrap up a bit, is the idea of, if you're not using a thing, and that thing digitally, that could be the light bulbs, going back to our Internet of Things. If you're not going to use a digital light bulb, don't buy a digital light bulb. If you're concerned about the data exposure on social media, wind down your usage of social media. If you're looking at an app to track your workouts and it wants access to your pictures and contacts and this, use a different app. Opt out is a through line, I think, that you've implied throughout today. And so I thought that's a good point to maybe end on, is really be more people could be more discerning about what they're putting out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, opt out. Yeah, don't give it to them.
Right. Well, Robert, thank you for being here. There's so much more in this topic. I mean, I'm pretty confident we could talk for hours about it. You and I have known each other for a while offline, and we have talked for hours about it. So I hope that at some point you'll come back and we can dive into some of those deeper threads on some of these topics. But where can people find you, find TechForge, and find the TechForge Foundation?
So I'm actually, my website is www.techforge.ai. Very simple. You can also go to www.techforge.foundation to get to the nonprofit. So, and I'm also on LinkedIn and Facebook if you want to look for me out there, but just go to the website and there's links there to everything.
All right. Well, Robert, I just want to thank you for coming on the No Bad Questions podcast, and I'm sure we'll be talking again soon. Thank you.